never underestimate the power of suppression. There's a story from my teenage years that I have to think of quite a lot these days. I was visiting a friend, and well, we were in his childhood bedroom, and he opened the window and lit, well, let's call it a herb cigarette. And well, I was like, are you completely crazy? Well, your mother's in the next room. The whole house will smell of this. And he, in a very delicate way, took a draft and said, never underestimate the power of suppression. And I have to think of this sentence a lot, especially when I watch the news. Have you seen that some judges in the US have to debate intensely how they can look after their own safety? These are judges, right? Rule of law, justice, safety, security. These are the people debating this. A small quote. Judge John Coffenor of the Western District of Washington, who had a SWAT team called to his house, proposed to put the marshals under, called the idea to put the marshals under Justice Systems Command a wonderful idea. Think of this, you're sitting at home having dinner, thinking of nothing bad, and suddenly the Special Forces Command comes to you because someone called the police and wrongly claimed that someone with a weapon was in your house. Strangely, this happens immediately after you have passed a ruling, made a ruling not so much in favor of Trump's views. Another example, you receive a pizza delivery, but you've never ordered one, ordered by unknown people. The message is clear. We know where you live. We know where your family lives. Well, yeah, but all this is not really related to anything, and it's not like Trump, when he took office, only started to work against judges and the judiciary system in general and spread hatred against this. A small selection presented by the Reuters agency, I know it's quite small print, but if you look closely, you'll see numbers like 2023, and the choice of words is partly more drastic than what we read these days. And then, of course, there also was this one notorious question on the new favorite platform of the far right. Translate the core message into French, L'État c'est moi, the state that is me. And to put it very clearly, there is no more interpreting to be done there, nothing to belittle. Someone who thinks in this way has a very authoritarian mindset that is not compatible with upholding a state with democratic checks and balances under the rule of law. And you could ask what mindset judges should have if you think this through. The kind of ideas that Trump is spreading. I have an idea. Trump said in March this year, the regular media, CNN and MSNBC, were, quote, really corrupt and illegal. And Trump would not be Trump if he hadn't repeated this in different other forms of language in various other media. So illegal, it has to be illegal. It is influencing of judges. So the picture is coming together. If the oh-so-golden age is initiated by prominent fascism researchers being deported, and if the author of How Fascism Works has to announce that he will move to Canada, which he did in several interviews, and in one with the German magazine Spiegel, he said the following about the state of freedom of science in the US, quote, "A friend who is not a US citizen but a professor at the Columbia University was questioned for hours and locked into a room at the border in New York. Who is supposed to want to experience this in the future?" And some students that ask themselves what will become of their academic career, their placement at some of the American universities are already looking for alternatives, and maybe in their search they will find alternatives. They find articles like this: Exile Harvard in Germany. Germany, there was something there, right? World champion of remembrance. Sounds kind of sexy, doesn't it? Well, but let's assume we have a Harvard student that is doing their homework regularly and then asks, who is inviting me here? And then you will find, for example, a book from 2018 with the following sentence, another quote: "Beyond the dark democratic number games, the democratic giving up is one of the biggest signs of the democratic downfall and civilization downfall of Europe." And I didn't see that sentence, but if the student reads on, there is something like the continuation of the bloodline. And well, at least there, I would assume that the student would be very much interested in which party, despite or perhaps even because of sentences like this, has proposed this person as the culture state secretary of the world champion of memory. And this person will then vanish into the rabbit hole of a sentence from Merkel that said, anything seems to be set in stone. In this video extract from Angela Merkel that the student might see, you might find a parliamentary inquiry of the Conservative Party. So move on to the website of the German Parliament, the Bundestag. This does sound interesting. You find something like, quote, "Some voices see non-governmental organizations as a shadow structure that does indirect politics supported by public money. Surely this will not be farmers' associations or the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is close to the CDU party." And then there is this website that's being linked to, Welt.de, which is one of the national papers. And in there you find one word that this person that wants to inform about their future has made life hell for her. And that is a word that represents a narrative, a conspiracy narrative, which is the foundation to legitimize attacks on state institutions and universities and science and the justice and so on. A wording that, not by coincidence, can be found more than 4,100 times on the Breitbart website, a far-right website. And that was something like deep state. So the student has done her homework and continues to dig further in this rabbit hole. And then she sees, well, there was a precursor to this. What was the context of this inquiry about non-governmental organizations by the conservative parties? These were organizations protesting against the joint vote by the CDU and the AfD, so two parties in Germany, an initiative that was completely irrelevant in Germany, beyond all firewall questions. It was about symbolism, nothing, just election campaigning. And this AfD, how about them and the Domestic Security Agency? How do they judge them? They were kind of against the constitution, weren't they? And the student then finds, okay, there was some unrest in the Conservative Party about this, but that doesn't really assure this student because she's scrolled further already and she's now at the AfD's election manifesto in 2021 because she's had bad experience, and what she sees there creates a strong déjà vu for her because she can read this. The increasing influence of woke ideologies on universities has to be finished. The financing of non-scientific gender research has to be stopped. A depoliticalization of research is highly urgently needed, for example, at the Fraunhofer and Max Planck Institutes, which are main institutes of scientific research in Germany. So at this point, maybe the students will go back to the tabs on Canada. So sorry. So what is just happening in many countries in this world is not normal. And I think the most important thing at this point is not to believe that it is normal. But still, although many are aware of this, there will be many people outside who are somehow suppressing this realization, that don't want to believe that something has really started to slide. And what could be the reasons for that? I think one reason is very clear to see. It is so human to long for harmony and stability, and to a certain extent, escaping reality is a survival strategy, especially in times of crisis. So we displace what overwhelms us, and of course it overwhelms us because all of us who are sitting here largely are nothing but people that see freedom, democracy, the rule of law as the foundation for their lives. So there are many things that we simply can't imagine outside of documentaries or serials or movies. But the problem is, the longer we lie to ourselves, the harder it becomes to open your eyes. Because if you do this, you would have to ask yourself three things. Firstly, well, I would have to admit to myself, first, I have to do something if I still want to be credibly upholding my self-image as an upright Democrat. The problem with doing something, though, is you are not always making yourself popular by doing this. If you are the people that disturbs, that causes a riot, that is unpleasant. You have to move, you have to do something. That's it. Secondly, the question might arise, why haven't I done anything for such a long time? That also is unpleasant, and the longer you wait, the more unpleasant it gets. And thirdly, the really awkward questions. Could I be a small part of the problem? Say, structural racism. So the longing for stability makes it attractive to believe in fairy tales. And you have to say, one of the modern fairy tales of our time is this story about the protest vote.
On the other hand, a lot of studies show by now that AfD accesses a core of voters that identify themselves strongly with this party. Those are not people who hesitate to vote for this party, even though the party talks like that. Those are people who vote for this party because of how they talk. I think one of the lessons learned, a lot of studies and discourses of the last few years should be this party is taking their base along with them in the course of radicalization. And the longer we let that happen, the bigger is the ratio of the strong believers that we cannot bring along anymore into the bigger parties. We have to stop telling ourselves fairy tales and myths, telling ourselves fairy tales that we can sleep better at night, or allow others to tell fairy tales and say, oh, we are not discussing, I leave those people in peace. Might be. We could be sleeping better at night, but surely not the family with small children in the refugee camp who turns on the news at night and finds recent numbers on the state of refugees. And there's another reason that makes it easy to not see things. It's a fact. Spreading authoritarian, racist, and fascist ideologies is fueled by normalization and from the fact that large parts of society let normalization happen. That leads to moving the red lines bit by bit. We notice this. What kind of vocabulary is used in the election campaigns? What terms are used? And they're not stopped in interviews as if it was a normal word, like migration. That's just one example. Earlier, the strategy was a targeted provocation, then you step a few steps back, maybe there's some consequences, and then you attack again. That used to be the case. It's not the case anymore. Right now, there are no steps backs. There are just attacks, Trump style. Attack, attack, attack. The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution has upgraded the AfD. High-ranking judges criticize the handling of party donations and misappropriation of state funds. That's classical. That's the strategy that we also see used in the US. And in addition, there is self-mitigation. It's actually a gift when conservative parties in this enter this race to the bottom and try to play the migration topic. There are statements, you take statements of the conservatives, you add a little bit more, and quickly you don't seem as radical as an extremist party because the others do it as well, just a little bit less. You are not getting voters back through this. What you're doing is you practice normalization. And it doesn't matter that the media doesn't do any more home stories with right-wing extremists on how they make their goat cheese. They don't have to do this anymore. Social media, enough people are following already. And the basic problem with normalization is if we're only looking at stories where the news are running towards us so quickly, then we're also quickly losing the big picture. And the framework of reference for what's normal moves considerably. I know criticizing the media is easy and cheap. And journalism cannot solve problems that are deeply rooted in society. But on the other hand, there are reasons for why I do not go to talk shows since years which contain people from the AfD. It's not because the AfD has published bad things about me on their homepage and I got death threats. No. I believe strongly that certain formats do not work with people who lie systematically, especially not live. You can do as many fact checks as you want after. This is just calming down. But the people who really should read those fact checks, they're definitely not reading them. They're just seeing the sound bit on the social media post. I think what we actually believe, what we actually need is contextualization and not being pushed by the self-victimization, playing the victim from the AfD. If you invite them and you ask them all the questions that you would ask everybody else, controversial questions, push them a little bit, then it's wrong again. Then they're the victim again. You cannot get them out of this victim role. And you really should not orient yourself around that, because the only situation where this attack could not come is if you would just say what they want. That's what Trump wants. No critical questions, only the question like, how do you manage to stay so fit in the press conference? That's not journalism. And dear newsrooms, don't do AfD the favor to enter those mental spirals. No matter how many questions are sent to you through questionable platforms, call things by their name. There are people who are called controversial, but they're actually just right-wing extremists. But let's go back to the big picture. In my family, we often talked about how it is living in an authoritarian regime. There are reasons for that. My parents left Poland before the end of the USSR. My grandfather was in a camp and survived only barely. But I'm questioning in how many families those conversations are held, and in how many families those conversations can happen, could happen at any point. And I have a suspicion. I think we know a lot about the outcome of authoritarian brainwashing, but I think we don't know enough about how subtle and vague the time before can be. And the less you know about this, I'm convinced of that, the more over the top the warning seems defend in the beginning, because you're not thinking like that. A little while ago, I couldn't sleep, and then I had contemporary witness stories, and after that, I couldn't sleep even more. There are lots of stories, not the big stories, the small stories about a man who tells about how he went to school and the offensive words became different. And then he talked about his mother, with his mother at home, and she said, "Don't dare, you can't talk about this." And he was scared about the fear in her eyes. Stories about how members of the party started to bully people on the train and everybody looked away. I think those are the stories that we need to hear, because that's doing something to you. At least I was touched by that, and I would wish we need more of that. And I think who listens to contemporary witnesses understands one thing. Only a party that, even if though a party seems ridiculous and incompetent, and all the persons in it, does not imply that this party is harmless. Painter of postcards is all I'm going to say. And we don't need the majority. We just need a substantial part of the population that does nothing for not having fair and free elections anymore. Authoritarian actors profit from crises. They always were. And the practical thing is, if there is no crisis, then you just make one. High prices for electricity could be the early signs of a huge economic crisis, even though the people out of work are few. Doesn't matter, if there is a will, there is a way. That's their motto. Those stories fulfill an important function. You have to keep in mind such a worldview leads to the fact that drastic demands seem appropriate, because this is an exceptional time, at least for the people believing in those stories. And I'm not sure if you know this, but some followers of those extremist parties are of the opinion that they are democratic, upholding democracy, but times of exceptional times justify exceptional means. One thing is clear. Losing control scares people a lot. I think we experienced that throughout the pandemic. And in the middle of crises, even though it's just perceived passes, the longing for a strong hand becomes stronger. But when other parties try to play that crisis game and it just become louder and louder, you have to be clear. You're preparing the ground that in the next step, authoritarian parties can come and in the next step say, oh, it's not that bad bending the law. Others do that too. We have a national crisis. Everybody said so. The others said so. And that's why I believe we shouldn't even start playing that crisis game. And even more, I think we should stop that urgently. And that's the point where I want to show you those numbers about migration. But anyone who enters the ring with authoritarian forces need to be prepared to face accusations. Very strong, drastic problems, lies, attacks, and a lot of people are insecure about that, even today. But you have to know that even that is part of the strategy. A part of the followers of authoritarian regimes is sugarcoating everything through projection. What do I mean? They're projecting in drastic words onto the opposition what you are actually planning. And for the followers, if we're asking it, how do the followers not see this? Well, they see something else. It's not ideal what this guy does, but the others are bad as well, no? And that's exactly what I was thinking about when I saw this excerpt from the AfD party program. That's rubbish. It's not about research without ideology. It's about pushing right ideology onto research institutions. Hey, no, researching climate crisis is neither ideological nor left. Physics is not left-wing. Physics is physics. Please don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And when the big lighthouses of our research don't research the data about climate anymore, they're not gone. And I think that's why it's important that we don't let these people get away with that, but insist again and again that not only the demand is problematic, but also the implied accusation to everybody outside of their own right corner. That's a central part of the whole narrative with which later dreadful things can be justified. Well, and what are we going to do with this? It's just a weak verb, not very promising. And I know we all wish a female knight in shining armor who comes in her road bike and solves everything, or the one format that solves everything, or the app. That's not going to happen, and I think we all know this by now. And I think that should not be our narrative, because a longing for a strong hand, strong man, and simple solutions, there's enough of that in the world. People, I'm very, very sorry to annoy you with this, but there is no other way than to put on our rubber boots and go demonstrate. Mud is awesome. Now is the time to create structures, band together, organize where you live, and also it's going to help you not feeling powerless and alone. And I beg you, stay with solidarity, because authoritarian regimes try it first with all the people who can't defend themselves. And we see this in the US right now. And I beg you, invest into the future, because even with money, even with small amounts, it's not getting better, especially when you're dealing with organizations who protect victims in the East. They're very much afraid of losing their funding. Let's not wait. Let's support them now so they can continue to stay courageous.
I think we can't wait to be saved. We should be part of the solution. And if you look across the pond, you will see that some of the most wealthy people in the world, where you might think they have all the room for maneuvering in the world to act well, that especially out of all people, these people cannot be relied upon. There's always going to be protagonists. But there will always be people that put the mirror up to them and won't let them get away with it. And that's what it will need. And therefore, I've got this little donation idea for you. Let's go.